You done up here? Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I do. All right. Oh no. Let's see. It's HDMI, right? Is that around here anywhere? It's gone forever. I'll just hold up my computer like this. We're good. Oh no, it's all good. Should plug right in. Okay. Cool. Absolutely. Towards the end, right? When it's yeah, 10:05. 10-minute to 5-minute warning for what's the end time? Is it 4:50? That's perfect. Okay, that does not look like a screen. Maybe. Let's see. Not detect. Yeah, I didn't seem to see anything. Could try the adapter. How long's the cable? What is that? Oh, did he save our lives? See if it works. Wow, my computer's not seeing anything. Try rebooting it. See if it's just being wonky. I saw something clicker there. Chromebook? Yeah. No, it's Razer. Let's see. Try rebooting this guy. Help.
No. No, no. Are you on a remote system by any chance?
I am not. This is all physical.
Okay, because I see the tab in the top middle section there. I saw that, and I was wondering if those were handles for.
Oh no, that's all just CMDs in the local system here.
So let's.
I'm gonna try to give it a reboot, see if that fixes it.
Well, yeah, but shouldn't be necessary.
It shouldn't be necessary at all.
Hang on. Let's try.
Problems with this one HDMI. Where's the
What adapter you were using?
I was just using a direct because I've got a native for it.
Okay.
I've never had problems with that before,
Yeah, let's try
but
it before.
the lead might be.
Let's see what happens. Well, no, now it's acting like it's going to do something.
Well, I did just restart it.
So let me get this one out here.
So. Oh, this does mean it's seen it though.
There.
Yeah. Okay.
Hang on.
So it looks like the adapter's not necessary.
So it's.
I'm gonna unplug this while I turn on my passport.
Wait, what? No, you pulled it. Why?
I would rather not them see the setup.
Oh. That does make sense. I see your point there. I'm not looking. I'm not looking.
Okay.
So,
We're a fair number of things to run.
oh crap.
It's all good. It's only taking a moment.
So I'll take this back to the gentleman if it works.
Yeah, I pulled it some I need to set up some things, but
So he's finishing his config stuff.
yeah,
and then he's
it
gonna
definitely works.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank
So
you.
I'm just gonna run the stuff, and then we'll be good to go.
So we'll just make eye contact with us when you're ready. It's no big deal. Take a minute.
We'll do the thumbs up, back and forth. Awesome.
And officially, please speak directly into
Into
the
the mic, yeah, I heard it's a little
so like if you're
wonky
standing
today.
there, if you're not going to walk, I'm going to actually turn it at you.
Yeah, I'll move a little bit further up here when I start.
Really take that bad boy.
Start. Oh no, don't you do this to me, you piece of crap. No, don't start to save me. Come on. Let's see. City. Oculus. Stop high. I need to have Postman here. Okay. VMware. Oh no, it works now. It's just I had to reboot the computer, so all my VMs are down. Hi, long time no see. We need to catch up. I'm not quite ready. I'm still rebooting all the stuff. Yes, ma'am. Just a moment. Let's see. LS CD. Hang on. LS CD. SRC. UI. LS. Dev. And one last thing. Is this Diagon? It's Emergence. Yeah, another vector. CD osmosis. Let's see. Diagon. Griffin. All right. Hey, DerbyCon. Sorry for that last minute pre-presentation. Oh my gosh, nothing's working. I can't get the screen. How many pen testers did it take to screw in a light bulb, that kind of thing? But it's all up and running now, so we can jump in and get started. All right, as you can tell, this talk is about a tool called Gryffindor. Releasing that today. It's a JavaScript-based backdoor remote administration tool / framework. So we'll kind of see why we're doing something like this, kind of where our toolkit exists in red teaming in general, and then go from there. So first, who am I? Obviously very cool. You can tell by the glasses. Done. I used to be in the Air Force, hence the digs. They're Air Force aviators and such. And BHES, so John Strand, saved my life, kind of like a rescue puppy. And now I'm a penetration tester for Black Hills. I do a lot of web applications, a lot of red teaming, those kind of things. Fun stuff. It's out of those things that tools like this, we find the need for them, and why we start developing a lot of those things and try to give back to the community if we can. I'm also founder of a company called Open Security and an instructor with the SANS Institute, the author of our Sec 460 course, which launched in August. So it's brand new. So far, it's going really well. I wrote that with Tim Medine, who's also around the conference somewhere. So if you run into him, say hi for me. So when it comes to red team operations in general and just penetration testing, offensive operations, there's a big diversity in the top and most secure we see organizations versus kind of everyone else. And it's not this linear scale where the top 10% is just as much better from the next group of 10% as they are from the one below that. It's completely different. So the top 10% of organizations, we're seeing some really good stuff, some absolutely outstanding defenses and protections they're doing, a lot of active defense, where the blue team is really being focused in on, and they're targeting whatever the attacker's doing, the techniques that the attacker is maybe implementing in order to prevent and to stop those. In the case of these organizations, we're starting to come to this realization that our PowerShell toolkit, which has kind of been developed by the community over the past 5 years, is really, really not quite cutting it anymore. It's getting really weak. We're running into a lot of defenses that are breaking apart our capability to perform and do offensive actions within our toolkit that we got accustomed to over time. So Microsoft's done a really good job here of putting the tools in the hands of organizations to be able to take on that burden and do some defenses of themselves. These tools, though, do a lot of targeting what they know to be bad, which kind of makes sense, right? If you're going to try to stop malicious activity, figure out what malicious activity looks like, and start blocking that. For us as penetration testers, though, in the open source community, that's a little difficult because many of the tools that we use aren't written by us. In fact, I've never done a penetration test where every single tool that I used on that penetration test was written in-house. I've never done that. Do a lot of tests where most of the tools that we use are built into the operating system themselves, so inherent Windows executables, things that are already there, using a lot of the Windows firewall these days. That just works universally, and it's really nice to have that capability there. But when we get a little bit further and we want to do something a bit deeper, like pull plaintext credentials out of memory, or start dumping hashes, or move laterally within, say, a tokenized Windows session, well, we might want to have a toolkit that's optimized for that. It's also helpful from the perspective of being more covert. If we're using built-in tools, we probably don't have the ability to do things like delay timers and beaconing and jitter, where you mix up the rate at which your command and control communication exfiltrates and infiltrates from the environment, egresses and ingresses. These are things we really want to have in our toolkit. And they are things that we get in things like PowerShell Empire or Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike's beacon tool implements a lot of these, and it's quite outstanding. But security vendors are very familiar with those tools, and they do a lot of targeting against what those tools specifically do, and that's not necessarily down to the tactic, as in beaconing malware, but often focused in on the tool itself and its implementation. This creates a challenge for us as penetration testers. On the other hand, the other 90% of organizations, we don't really see a lot of that. PowerShell is probably going to be alive and well in many different ways, shapes, and forms for those organizations for a long period of time. This makes it really weird for us as testers, as in 90% of the time, we are on top, absolutely demigods every day. And the other 10%, we feel like we're getting our butts kicked. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but we do have to make sure that when we do work for our customers, the value that we're providing them does not provide them with a false sense of security that's based off of what we are doing and not what intrusion sets in the real world are doing. So it's okay to lose, just not the wrong way. And so to look at that, to know that we are taking up this burden properly and actualizing it for our customers, we actually have to be fairly familiar with what's going on in the real world, what intrusion sets are doing, what kind of attacks they're going after, what their goals are, and how they're implementing that. Because if our toolkit, if what we would normally do is not that, and we're unsuccessful, but they're successful, we've caused that false sense of security for the customer, and that's really, really bad. That's dangerous. So to start, we want to think about what they're doing and why. From the perspective of cyber criminal organizations, often it's all about monetization. We see this grow over time as well. Spam is still a big one. Viagra, got to get that Viagra. That's a way to make money, absolutely. So that's still something to consider. Ransomware grew very, very rapidly. It's still around, absolutely, see it every day, but it is beginning to taper off for things like crypto miners as well, because it's a new way to monetize the exploitation that they've gained against an unwary target. Now that last one is a bit different. Cybercrime as a service isn't necessarily a specific way of doing something like spam or ransomware or crypto miners. It's a way for them to monetize those schemes to others. So we see quite a bit of cybercrime as a service, specifically in the case of ransomware, and we see some interesting ones in the case of crypto miners for blogs that do it wittingly instead of providing ad revenue. It's a pretty interesting thing we're seeing today. Pick that apart. Now, this is a talk about JavaScript. You can do all of these in JavaScript, and our ad in many cases is. Specifically, we started to see this really start to come up and take speed in 2017. Say in 2017 January time period, they were using a decent amount of Windows scripting host-based JavaScript malware in order to execute things. We'll take a look at what that actually looks like, how it works, and how easy it is to perform here in just a second. But what they started out with is they were using this to run something, and that something would download all of the rest of their malware toolkit, all of these executables, EXEs, to then run whatever it was attack-wise they wanted to do. In the case of ransomware, what this means is they would do some kind of phishing attack or get some user to click on something with a .js file, and that .js file would then download the ransomware. It wasn't itself actually the ransomware, it was a Trojan downloader or a malware downloader. Well, these started to grow in complexity over time. This is what's really interesting in the adversary's perspective when it comes to ransomware specifically. I mentioned before that when antivirus is targeting our tools and we're unsuccessful, that doesn't necessarily reflect upon the intrusion sets. However, in the case of ransomware, we want to make money. And the way we make money is we ransom and extort an organization. The more organizations I can extort, the more money I can make, which means I want to do these as much as possible. This gives antivirus the opportunity to develop signatures and countermeasures and host-based protection mechanisms against something like ransomware. This means less money for the bad guy. The way that they stay ahead of this is they continuously iterate upon their toolkit. In most other malicious offensive operations, we see this iteration take place much more slowly because they're very careful about losing their expensive toolkit that they spent hundreds of hours developing for the purpose of weaponizing your environment and making money off of you. But in the case of ransomware, they can't quite do that, so they need to stay ahead of AV. This means that they make a lot more tools. They keep making more and more and more and more. As penetration testers, when it comes to our backdoors, we could also try to do this. We could make a new backdoor. For every pen test that we do, we would bypass antivirus every time, 100% over 100. Our pen tests have also now become 5,000 times more expensive. This is not necessarily something we have the ability to do. It's because our cost model is different than theirs is. Off of one of these ransomware gigs, they can make tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars simply because the value of the data that they've now managed to extort the victim organization for. In a penetration test, we can't necessarily do that. But we can observe the growth and development of their toolkit over time and try to replicate some of those features. So what you saw next was a move towards JavaScript-centric malware, where fewer of those ransomware tools were pulled down and downloaded into the organization with that malware downloader. This started with most of the ransomware toolkit with the exception of the cryptography portions of whatever it is that they were doing. They'd be infiltrating these as executables, and there would still be an executable written to disk at some point that would do the actual cryptography and then give you the extortation notice. The first standalone JavaScript-only ransomware that we saw was known as Ransom32, and this is written in NWJS. For those who know what NWJS is, the idea with NWJS is applications on all systems, be they Mac OS X, Windows, Linux, using JavaScript, which is something that people know how to make UIs in, GUIs, very quickly and very easily, that can then run cross-platform. That's what the purpose of Node WebKit, NW, is. One that you might be a little more familiar with is called Electron. It's the same idea, a lot of the same modules in there. It's the idea of having something that can then run on the local system. If you're familiar with Electron, you might have seen the very first slide. The Electron logo was there, and so was the React.js one. The tools that we're going to talk about today are written in those same kind of languages, those same frameworks, so that we can do exactly what the adversary is doing, kind of replicate what their modus operandi is here. So with Ransom32, what it would create is an executable payload. It'd be a .exe file. Binaries are a little suspect. You don't necessarily want to email somebody a binary and hope they double-click on it and get pwned. So you might still need some other kind of payload execution mechanism, some way to stage that, but you ended up with a binary here. To be fair, in penetration testing, we're seeing a lot of movement back towards binary payloads because they just work. They work really, really well, often, often, often. The reason for that is we don't see a huge amount of application whitelisting in organizations. There was a push towards this, I would say, 8 years ago, and it kind of tapered out once the community shifted to PowerShell-style malware, and you saw a lot less focus and emphasis on binary payloads. So it's definitely still effective, but not necessarily the easiest thing to immediately get in and start wrecking the network, making havoc. Now the next one here is RAA. RAA is JavaScript, 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 but executed via the Windows scripting host and using the Crypto.js module in order to do the cryptography for the development of the extortation scheme. And finally, what we see in malware as well in JavaScript space are cryptocurrency miners. Typically, these are implemented in JavaScript because you just want system resources. The browser's got system resources. You don't have to pwn the browser in order to get it to do things for you. You just have to use it. And so we see a lot of those implemented in JavaScript because JavaScript's a logical language for browsers. And then when you're ransomwared, you see something like that. Let's take a look at what this actually looks like in practice here. So this is just a Windows operating system, normal computer. Oops, that is not what I wanted to hit. And we've got here on the desktop a little paystub.doc file. What's interesting about Windows scripting host is it's a .js file, but on Windows, by default, the file extension is not displayed. So you look at this bottom one here, it's Gryffindor.js. I've specifically gone into Windows Explorer in order to say view file extensions. Your average user is not going to see the file extensions on these, so they'll perceive the file extension to be whatever I've put in front of that. In the case of this, it's paystub.doc.js. And for unwitting users, this is also a little interesting because they see the scroll icon. That doesn't look like the standard Microsoft Word icon, but then you've got WordPad as well, and you've got other weird file extensions that maybe aren't too used to. They're definitely not looking at the icon and saying, this is evil for sure, for sure, for sure, just based off that, and certainly not 100% of the cases within your environment. We only need to get it to execute once in order to be in. If you double-click on this, Windows runs it immediately. This here is JavaScript, and all it says is start a WScript shell and run calc.exe. That looks like this. So that's the code. That's it. Just a few lines. In fact, if you wanted to make it simpler, you could even take out the function definition and just run the code directly. Very simple. And this on the right here is what it would normally look like to a user when the file extensions are hidden. Paystub.doc, paystub.docx, paystub.xsls, whatever you want to call it. But the final extension, the .js, is invisible. This makes it a powerful technique to use to gain that initial exploitation, that initial execution. This is why we see it being used by criminal organizations very, very frequently. And a good way to look at these and differentiate them is to compare it to some other way for us to get execution. Phishing is often the way that we'll get something to run on an environment. It's just kind of a go-to that'll work. We like to do a lot of different things at BHS to get this to happen just because phishing gets boring after a while, but for a criminal organization, boring still sells. Boring still makes money. So we see a lot of phishing. And when you phish someone, oftentimes you're going to have some kind of payload, some kind of document that you send in there. This here is my phish of choice because I'm a really bad person. We'll see why here in a second. Particularly around tax season. So normally here on the top, I'll put a logo of the customer. And this is a charitable donations.xslx file. And it says, hey, it's tax season. The company is going to donate to a charity of your choice here, $400. Pick the 3 charities you would like that $400 to be split amongst. This works. The reason this works is because if you don't pick this, suddenly your charity, suddenly the Wounded Warrior Project isn't getting money. So this always works. This works very well. In fact, this works so well that when we do this, without exception, we'll get an email back from some user in the organization that says, why was I not consulted on what charities were going to make this list? Next year, you absolutely must consult us and add these 3 charities. You're a bad person for not talking to us about it. Thanks. I know you ran it. So what you see here is a pop-up, and the pop-up is asking me if I want to update the Excel document. If we click Update here, it's going to give us another pop-up, and this pop-up says, would you like to start the application msexcel.exe? Sure, I want to start MS Excel. We click Yes, and now we have a calc. There's one other step here for a DDE-based Excel document from a click perspective, and that's the protected view. So in this case, this document I wrote myself, and I saved it onto my own disk. So protected view isn't observed because I made it myself. But if I were to email this to someone else, it's in protected view, and there'll be this little enable content button here at the top. Now the reason this ruse says, hey, I need you to modify the document and send it back to me is because they have to click enable content in order to modify the document. There's complexity here, and this is important. I need them now to open the document, that's a double click, then I need them to click 3 different things, edit the document, and send it back to me. And in fact, the complexity goes further because I had to have a ruse that would convince them to do this. In the case of something like Windows Scripting Host, where it's just run and done, a lot less of that complexity means a substantially greater click-through rate. Okay, so that sounds bad. Why would Microsoft have done something like that? I mean, why? JavaScript I get. It needs to run in the browser. That's how you make logic in your web applications. That's how you make HTML5, Web 2.0, nice, model view controller web applications and all that jazz. It makes sense. Got it. But on the host operating system, by default, double-click on a .js file, and it runs it? Well, so who here has ever used Mosaic? First browser for anyone? Yeah, a couple folks use Mosaic. Netscape Navigator, anyone? Yeah, some Netscape Navigators in the house. Internet Explorer, your favorite browser forever? No, I got 1 or 2. This is Internet Explorer 3, so I hope it's not that one. So this is actually the genesis of JavaScript. It was made by the Netscape Corporation as part of the initial browser wars. As we all know, the browser wars are ended. There's the one true browser known as Microsoft Edge. It has won and is king forever and ever. But it's not a new thing, these browser wars. Firefox, of course, is now what Netscape Navigator ended up turning into after Internet Explorer and Microsoft did essentially win the browser war at the time. To win this, though, Microsoft tried everything. They didn't make JavaScript. Heck, they didn't even make HTTPS. But they said, implement everywhere. And this is one of the reasons why the Windows Script host and its consumers throughout the fabric of the Windows operating system exist and can run things in the weirdest of places. You can run scripts, JavaScript or Visual Basic, from within WMI. You can run scripts from JavaScript within RunDLL32. You can just double-click on them, and Windows Scripting Host will automatically run these scripts. There are so many different weird, random places inside Microsoft where you can run these things. And this is why it's Windows 95 and Internet Explorer 3 and Mosaic. Thank goodness. So let's talk about antivirus here for a second, because this is actually a really big reason why we push to JavaScript here for the purpose of post-exploitation capability. It's nice that we can send somebody a .js file, they get a double-click on it, and we're in, and that's done, with no need for dynamic document exchange or some weird Excel thing that might get patched out from under us in the future. As an example, ransomware artists were using a lot of dynamic document exchange as well in order to do ransomware attacks. But they were generally using Microsoft Word for this. Microsoft patched DDE out of Word. The way they patched it out of Word is they removed the feature. It's just not there anymore. Nice patch. But they didn't patch it out of other components of the Office suite, things like Excel, things like Outlook, things like OneNote. So it's still there. A lot of folks think that it's not because they saw the patch went across. The patch only affects Microsoft Word. When it comes to JavaScript, well, it looks normal when it's going across the network. If you see JavaScript going across the network over port 80 or port 443, the web application ports, that's pretty normal. You might be able to do something if it was, say, VB script. That looks maybe a little weird if that's being uploaded or downloaded within the network. But JavaScript's very ubiquitous, and we absolutely see that all of the time. When it comes to antivirus here, we've got a lot of signature-based detection mechanisms. That's the traditional way to do things. I'm not really going to bash on antivirus. There's some problems that we've got in the community revolving around antivirus, but I'm not going to bash on it as a tool. I'm not going to say antivirus is dead. I think there's some serious problems there. I think we're definitely still in the signature-based detection space, even if marketing tells you otherwise. Signature-based detection has done really well over the past several months. You use Windows Defender the past several months, it is absolutely on the ball. If it knows about something that's bad, the way to get past it is magic. Do wizard dance. And it changes all the time. So for us at Black Hills, we're spending a substantial amount of time these days getting execution of the tools we would traditionally use, like Cobalt Strike, or Meterpreter from Metasploit, or PowerShell Empire. We spend a lot of time just getting those things to run. And if we need to send somebody a phishing message every time one of these things needs to run, well, that's inefficient, that's horrible, we're going to be in a really bad space here. We're also be wasting a lot of the customer's time and dollars if we're doing this all of the time. And this is because antivirus has focused very, very heavily on the tools that we use. This makes sense if you think about it, right? If I'm a vendor and I need to sell my antivirus product to probably not Microsoft.com because Microsoft makes their own, though you'd be surprised. You've got to sell my antivirus solution to General Motors. I want them to buy it. Okay. If GM says, we want to test out how effective this is, what do? They might grab a pen tester and say, hey, come pen test this thing, can you get it to work? If you beat the pen tester, you must be a really good antivirus solution. And this is where we start to get into pretty dangerous space as penetration testers, because if we get beat by AV, is the attacker, the adversary, the real intrusion set, also getting beat by AV? And if we're not iterating our toolkit, the answer is going to be no. And we can't give our customers that false sense of security by that actually happening. So be very careful here about vendor marketing, because a lot of their terminology is just simply incorrect or ludicrously overblown. That doesn't mean that the engineers in those organizations, those antivirus companies, are bad. I've got some really good friends at Symantec. I know a lot of people at Carbon Black. They're doing some wonderful stuff. Black Hills has a love-hate relationship with Cylance. They send Joff Thayer beers every now and then. They're smart guys, and they're doing good work. But the work isn't necessarily affecting the problem that we're experiencing. I'm not saying that they need to not focus on things like Cobalt Strike. If I'm an intrusion set and Cobalt Strike works, I will absolutely use that because I'm not worried about burning my toolkit if I'm using something that's open source or something that I can pay for. If Cobalt Strike doesn't work, though, then I need to do something else. And for us as penetration testers, we have to also be able to take that next step. We need to be able to do something else as well. So behavioral detection, this is one of those big buzzwords. Most of the implementations of behavioral detection are actually signatures of a pattern of behavior. So it's not a signature for one thing, but it's two or three things linked together and a signature for that. It's still a signature-based detection mechanism that's not really a behavior. But you'll hear it called that all the time. And then anomaly detection is cool. It's also very, very hype-centric. I think anomalous-based detection is going to be a really cool thing that emerges over the next 5 to 20 years. And I think you might have a little bit of growth there as we get more into and more understanding of machine-based learning. We're not there yet. We're not even close to there yet. Most of these anomalous-based solutions are hot air. So if AV beats your pen testers, does that mean you're safe? Hopefully the answer is yes, but security is not mathematically provable, not directly, and things might come out. This is one of the reasons why I often emphasize that onion model of security, where you layer these security controls, and in many cases what you'll do is you'll give your penetration testers a leg up and say, okay, the antivirus defeated you, but what happens if it doesn't? Because we want to know that too. We want to know if you're stopped during the next stage, the next phases as well. So vendors, of course, they're trying not to have that conversation. They want to look good to sell product. They're businesses. This happens. For us as penetration testers, though, we need to be aware of this, and we absolutely need to be able to perform at the same level as attackers who are using custom and homegrown tools. So this is an example of that. This is actually code written by Geoff Thayer with Black Hills to defeat Cylance. So Cylance had a behavioral-based detection mechanism that essentially would trap on Meterpreter when Meterpreter made a call to create thread. So this isn't really going after the behavior or the existence or the what is of Meterpreter, Metasploit's backdoor. This is going after a very specific call. This is very much a signature. Swapping that call to memory mapping and memory mapping the shellcode before invocation bypasses Cylance. I haven't done this quite recently, but talking to Geoff, I'm pretty sure this still works today. And you're bypassing any virus vendor that way. Of course, this is a dedicated, specific bypass for a specific vendor. If you have to do this for every vendor that you encounter on every test ever, and when you publish this, they send you beer and fix it, that's not something that's generally sustainable. And this has become a bit of a conundrum for us at Black Hills because we really like to give back to the community, contribute to open source, and just about everything that we do. But we've still got that need and that requirement to effectively do what's best for our customers. So we can't lose to antivirus that we know another intrusion set isn't going to lose to. This means considering holding back some of those latest techniques and starting to stockpile. This is a bad idea. This isn't a place that we want the world to be in. But it is something that we have to consider as penetration testers because we absolutely need to be able to affect the proper amount of value that we've been hired to perform when doing testing. So when it comes to antivirus, they've got one job, and it's to stop the bad stuff from happening. They focus on a problem that isn't necessarily the right problem, but they do have a place in our information security calculus. So these evasion and detection games are detracting, I think, from the overarching security opportunity for many customers. We have to kind of be aware of that, specifically because I'm seeing a lot of folks taking away a false sense of security because the penetration tester failed or they failed at some stage of the compromise. This is already a dangerous problem that you see happen all the time when the pen tester didn't fail, where they say, well, actually, in a real-world situation, it wouldn't have worked out quite that way, or we accidentally gave you a little bit too much access to the system. Well, the attacker who targeted that one user over there via phishing, that user you also gave a little bit too much access to the system, and therefore the system's now compromised as a result of other user permissions, other user controls. A 0 day is not what's necessary to compromise an organization, and really they might just be a waste of your time if you're going after an organization. So this whole false sense of security, it's something that we want to have. We absolutely want to have that sense of security. We want to stick our head in the sand and pretend like things are good. We absolutely want to. That's just visceral. However, if we're going to do right, we absolutely have to break that and make sure that we have a good understanding of where we are security-wise, be it for the better or for the worse. If we're outstanding and we know we're outstanding and we know where our edges lie, where we've got some weaknesses, that's great. If we're not doing so hot, but we know it, that's still better than not doing very well and not knowing anything about it at all. And as penetration testers, we have to make sure that this gets communicated across to our customers and that we don't lead them into this mind problem, this mind trap, where they think they're more secure than they actually are in the real world. So if we want to do something like this, if we want to bypass these protection mechanisms, antivirus is targeting what it knows to be bad. And so if we target what we know to be good, it becomes much more difficult for antivirus to go after you. When it comes to the top 10% of organizations, some of the defenses that we see them put in place that are absolutely outstanding and very good are focused host-based or network-based. Oftentimes there are human involved doing analysis. Might be host-based analytics on what the processes on the systems are doing. For example, if PowerShell.exe is constantly calling out to a random IP address on the internet from one of the hosts inside your environment, is that okay? You might want to talk to your domain administrators. Maybe somebody wrote a PowerShell script that's doing that. It's weird, but maybe it happened. If spoolsv.exe is beaconing out to some random IP address on the internet, that's your print spooler in Windows, that's probably not okay. Probably pwned. This is a great way for defenders to really get in on the host, get in on the weeds, and start to find bad stuff that's happening, looking for what the host processes are doing. Those processes probably have no business doing. On the other side, the network as well is that same opportunity. If you've got a random IP address on the internet that's being called out to every 5 seconds, that's behavior indicative of beaconing malware, where beaconing malware is reaching out to look for taskings every 5 seconds. When it gets them, it executes it on the system, and then it responds with here's the output of the command that you just ran. So if we're looking for these kind of things, maybe on a frequency domain, Black Hills has put out a tool called Rita, and there's also a commercial version that they've released called AI Hunter that does a lot of these kind of things. The goal of it is to hunt down beaconing-based malware by doing things like analysis against a frequency domain, against a time spectrum on the network to identify these kinds of activities that are indicative of malware. This will work for PowerShell Empire. This will work for Cobalt Strike. This will work for malicious malware that we've never seen before that also beacons in order to do its C2. This is a common way to do C2, and if we're focused on what that tactic is and breaking that apart, we'll be much more effective. But if we're trying to operate and we want to win, win, win every time, we also need to iterate beyond that. For example, this random IP address that's on the internet that we're beaconing to, should we be going there? There's a lot of use of domain fronting these days to make that not appear to be the same IP address that you're actually communicating out to. There's other techniques as well, like social media-based command and control, where is Twitter blocked in your network? Perhaps. Is Reddit blocked in your network? Maybe you got some social media blacklists going on, it's a really secure organization. Is the New York Times blocked on your network? Well, there's this thing on the New York Times, if you go to an article and you scroll to the bottom, you see a lot of Russian messages in the comments. That means that they can type in information, they can hit post, the information is stored there, anybody else can browse to it and see that information and download it as well. This is everything that you need from a C2 perspective for malware communication. Send information, receive information from some joint host, some joint location. So you can see things like GCAT, which is Netcat over Gmail. Absolutely outstanding. That's going to get around basically everyone's network-based controls like that. And when it comes to those kind of things, many of these web applications themselves beacon. For example, you browse to Gmail and you get a new email. That email shows up automatically. That's because your browser is beaconing to that web application consistently in order to find the new information and then adjust the web application state so that you can see your new email as it pops in immediately. JavaScript does a lot of this very well and kind of just intrinsically in many cases, things like Meteor that manage the data state of an application directly. And so these web applications can be hard to discern versus malware as well. Another thing you might look at is payload size. For instance, if we're constantly getting our tweets, our tweet feed, that tweet feed is probably going to look different over time because the size of the tweets, the size of the messages, they're different for each one. As we get a new tweet that shows up there, again, the size of that package can be different. So you can also look on your network for beacon packets that are always the same size. That's another great way to find beaconing malware. So if we want to look real, we want to model what is real. And we can actually use many of these things like Gmail, like Google Docs, like Twitter, in order to accomplish those ends. There's two pieces here though, right? There's the network, for sure, but there's also the host. And this is where we have a lot of trouble getting around, because if we want to have something execute, we could try to inject into the memory space of a process that would normally do this, maybe inject into Explorer, Internet Explorer, or Firefox or Chrome. We could try to do something like this. That's probably not where it's executing to begin with though, which means if you see that communication activity happen before or after, you can see some things there. But if we really want to model what's good, the browser is making network communications. There are processes on the host that are doing processy things. That looks normal. So if we want to have covert communication, beaconing executables on the host looks suspect. That doesn't look normal. If somebody's looking carefully, they can stumble upon that, and you're caught. Internet traffic from iExplorer.exe, on the other hand, that's probably pretty normal. So the solution here is, for our communication, if we could use the browser and JavaScript, logical language for the browser, to do all of that C2 communication, that's nice. That's covert. Then we've got the problem of system execution, though, because just JavaScript in the browser doesn't mean you can run things on the local system. You need to have some way to tie that in. Well, Windows has this fancy thing that lets you run JavaScript. Scripting host is generally executed via C-script. You can execute with a bunch of different things because everything runs on Windows. It just does. But typically you see that as C-script. If you were to run a C-script-based backdoor, you might see on the host cscript.exe making network traffic out on your network, might flag that as something that looks malicious, something that looks bad. But if you've got C-script running on your system, doesn't necessarily mean that the system's compromised by itself. For example, if your users, your admins and such, are doing things with Visual Basic, or they've got a startup script that's in Visual Basic, these things are common. We see them all over networks all the time. They're done suspect, but just the execution itself isn't necessarily bad. So we could run something in the host, and we could send the information through the browser. But that means we need to have some kind of linkage between the browser and between that thing that's running on the host. There's a lot of ways we could do this. Now, up here's a diagram of the first way that I thought to do this, and it was a bad idea. So I did it once, and I'm like, this is not a good idea. So the idea is you've got the JavaScript running in the browser, you got the JavaScript running on the host, and then when you've got commands that need to be executed, you've got a NetSH firewall rule that's just waiting and logging when it gets a packet. So then when you send the JavaScript in the browser a command, it then browses to the local system, hits that NetSH firewall rule, and then it establishes a channel with the local system to pass that data back and forth. Complex, easy to break apart. You need to have NetSH firewall permissions. Not so cool. And so I was chatting with a friend, and he was like, well, you know, there's artifacts the browser puts in the system, right? Like cookies. Your cookies are stored. You've got temporary internet files. In HTML5, we've even got this snazzy thing called local storage. Local storage is a data cache where many HTML5 applications will store information. And this information isn't simply temporary for that browser session. It's actually stored on the local system so that if you were to open up that browser and go to that website again, then you still have access to that local storage, that local cache of information. So the web browser and the JavaScript running in it can add things to local storage. That's its purpose. But local storage lives actually on the physical file system. So if you've got something running on the physical file system, it can edit that information as well. And since all of this is in the app data directory of that user, if you're running as that user, you've got the permissions to edit and interact with this information. So you can trade information back and forth here through a local file system I/O channel where your execution on the host makes no network communication whatsoever, but your execution in the browser does all of that. And if you want to run something in the host, the browser tells the JavaScript on the host to run that stuff for you. All right. And so in comes Gryffindor. It's a tool that I wrote to do a lot of these kind of things. There's several ways you can, of course, make JavaScript-based malware. We kind of talked through them, but to summarize, you could use something like Electron or NWJS to create something like an executable to run. The code for that would be almost exactly equivalent to the code that you would use for whatever's running in the browser, because remember, NWJS and Electron are just a website in an executable. They're packaged around the Chromium project, and that's how it achieves those ends. So we can definitely have executables we want to with JavaScript. We can have JavaScript payloads that are running in the browser. We can establish browser sessions. These are also pretty interesting because let's say you have no ability to execute on the local system. Does that mean you can't C2 in the network or do things to the internal environment? The answer is no. If you own the browser and the browser's behind their firewall, their internal firewall, you can have that browser do other things to things behind the internal firewall. You absolutely can. So there is value in these browser sessions. The Beef project is a good example of this, where you've got Beef hooks that you would put into the browser to control the browser long term. You have the browser do things. Now, Beef's also been around for quite a long time. It hasn't seen a huge amount of development in recent years, but browsers have. Chrome and Firefox and those projects have absolutely exploded the capability of a browser itself. And so now browsers are very nearly an operating system in and of themselves. You've got some difficulties back and forth, as in CORS, which prevents you from getting things that are not from the same domain as you are. So if you're in the browser and you own the browser, that doesn't technically mean you own things from every resource that the browser's ever communicated with. That browser sandboxing does still tie our hands a little bit. But if we own the browser, we've got some kind of session going on inside their environment. And with the growth of a lot of these browser technologies like WebRTC, that means we can do a lot of things. For instance, WebRTC is used to do full torrent clients that stream, like download a torrent thing through browsers. And the peer-to-peer communication is all in the browser. As in, when it's downloading something, it's not downloading it from the website. It's downloading it from all of the other torrent peers, and it's all in the browser. So your browser's suddenly making weird network connections to other third parties, and WebRTC is what enables all of these things. So when it comes to the newer browser technologies, we've got the ability to do things like port scans in the internal environment with some pretty heavy efficacy. So I think if we start to have more and more trouble when it comes to executing on the local file system of individual host machines, we may end up moving a substantial amount of our toolkit into the browser itself and using that browser as the agent by which we compromise other things internal to the environment and begin moving laterally. We're not quite there yet. Most of our things still kind of work on the host. You just have to find out which one's perfect. So in this case, the project here is actually a collection of several tools, because there's another problem I've kind of interacted with in our community too. So these attackers, they might be building a new backdoor for whatever the engagement is, and we can't necessarily keep up with that because there's a lot of other things involved with the backdoor. You've got to have a C2 server. You've got to have some way to push and pull the data back and forth. You have to have a UI to control that thing. And so if you're using Empire, you're probably using Empire's UI. If you're using Cobalt Strike, you're using Cobalt Strike's UI. If you're using Metasploit, you're using Metasploit multi-handlers and Meterpreter. Okay, it's another UI. If you want to build your own backdoor, you can't necessarily just build it into one of these other systems. You have to build all those other pieces as well. So these other tools that you see up here, Emergence and Oculus, are that. So Oculus is a modular C2 system that lets you set up things like handlers and HTTP listeners and such, and it sends the information to Emergence, which is an API. And so if you want to interact with that API, you want to get the information that is a callback from one of your backdoors, or if you want to create a new backdoor to interact with it, all you have to do is create a backdoor that makes the proper API calls via JSON, and suddenly your backdoor just works with the entire system, and you can use the same UI as well. So if we're in a situation where we're constantly building these new backdoors because we need to keep up with the Joneses, you have a system now where you can just make the backdoor piece much simpler than all of the other logic and such. Okay, so this is the API here. For the tool development, it's just a public API with all the API calls and objects and such. And on to the tool. So this here, the whole project, all of those different pieces, is called Prismatica. It's got its own little website, and I'm continuously developing other tools against it to be able to use all those pieces and data model. But the first piece that we're releasing here is Gryffindor and the whole C2 project there. And this is kind of what it looks like. Okay, we're almost out of time, so let's just run a couple things here. Here's an example of the backdoor. You can type something like sessions, and this can show you that there's a session now established already on the system. We can interact with that session. The session ID here, it's a little small, so hard to see. That ID is 0, it's the first session. We say interact with that session, and then we can type shell commands to have it run. We can do something like shell calc to pop a calc. We could do shell dir. It's going to run a dir on the system, and it's going to show you the files that are in that directory. Now, it's taking a little while to come back. And the reason for this is it's beaconing malware. So it's making those API calls on an interval. You can adjust that interval. Right now, the interval is 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, it's checking in to see if there's new tasks. And then if there's no new tasks, it doesn't do anything. If there's a new task, it runs that, and it sends the information back, and the UI goes in and gets that information. This UI here is in Electron, so it will run on all operating systems, Mac OS X. Well, I say all. Electron doesn't run on mobile just yet, so no mobile. But everything else it'll run on. It's got tabs, so you can have multiple tabs as well for your multiple sessions if you want to, and all that jazz. Long term, I intend to have this UI work for other tools like Empire. Empire has a REST UI, just like the API here of the Emergence product. So you should be able to use more than one backdoor within the single system, which would be very nice to have long term. At the moment, it's just it just works for Gryffindor. All right. I think that's about all the time we have. I'll be up here for questions if you've got any, but after that, I'll turn over the new speaker. Hi, Carrie, how's it going? Speaking of, actually, you know, like that Electron UI there, I'm writing one of those in GPAT. Because, well, I've got 460, and my students are 400 level, so having a little GUI for them to use GPAT. GPAT's an amazing lab, and it runs perfectly in 460 every time. So, yeah, thanks again. Hey, buddy. Yeah.
This is cool. I try not to let sleep when I do this.
This is really cool. I mean, like, I was putting me to sleep, and I was dying, but it's pretty cool.
No, I'm just exhausted.
Evan. Hey, Evan?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Good to meet you, Evan.
This is cool though, man. I'm digging this.
This has been all of my sleep time for the past couple weeks.
You were talking about this at...
Yeah, so I actually had this in fact, the folder that I was running it from is MUTC, because this I had.
Oh, you had this MU. Okay, good.
Yep, I just didn't run it fast expensive browser. Firefox is SQLite database. I don't know what Chrome is. Internet Explorer, I do not believe is SQLite. It's something weird.
I just want to know if you still have that one. He was also like,
I do still have the electric car. Yeah? Awesome, man. Thank you. I do still have electric car. It does still not run. So it did run once upon a time, but it caught. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. It blew up, and so I have just about all the parts I need to make it run. But every time I look at it, I'm just sad. So I haven't touched it since.
you still talk to Chris?
Shield? Yeah, all the time.
Are you guys still doing anything sober stuff?
I want to, but I keep coming up with some kind of random new project, and I never finish it. So it's 80% to its next release, but I don't see myself finishing that until March, which is unfortunate because I would really like to have that actually work in the same class. Let me get this out of your way. Oh, are you going here next
Yep.
week? Awesome.
Would have attended the talk anyway, but
What's that?
would have attended your talk anyway, but
yeah, you were only
it was
here because
convenient.
you had to come up.
No.
This is your PowerShell thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Similar to the stop process. You're better pause process.
Yeah, well, so that's part of it. Josh here has really done some pretty interesting stuff. So let's see here.
Gotta go run the HR booth, but it was good seeing you talk.
Yeah, it is.
Outside.
Absolutely. Thanks for going, brother.
I gotta get going. I gotta get this set up. Brother.
Yep.
Awesome. You guys are doing a lot of laundry right here.
I guess we're gonna sit here.
Yeah. And just and yeah, and
We'll-
make sure,
we'll
yeah, and just make sure you're on top of that because they've been it hasn't been up as there is. So as long as you're doing yeah. The main complaint has been from the TVs around where they said that they have I guess it's been really quiet, which all right. We'll hold up a sign for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or 2 minutes. So if you need it for the morning, and of course, you like things. And we'll let you know when we check everything.
Thank you very much.
So good news. And that's good. Okay. Okay. We got some time.
Alright, we're gonna be good.
Yeah. Wow, nobody's here. All right, that's fine.
Well, she said the jobs were just getting up, so it should be
Okay. So we got the right deck. Okay. Yep.
I'm sure they already mentioned it to you. So, into because we will not hear you.
Understood. Understood. So, I don't know if you guys have noticed this already, but demo gods are alive and kicking.
I'll let you use the power of the magic unicorn during this talk.
Please, magic unicorn. Okay, so. Hey, Callie's. Probably not. We've got a lot of stuff. We'll see. Oh, the answer is yeah. You invite us over, we'll be on. All right. So, okay, let's get. Wait, we can cancel? That's an option? We're out. Okay, so then we need to. Oh, we still got time. We're doing all right. We're going to recover. Inshallah. So, we need an admin. This. We need a regular CMD. Okay. Whoa. And then you need. Yep, I'm getting you that file right now. There you are, amigo.
Cool, thank you.
All right, so then. Yep. is not configured? Oh, shit. Still not connected, post only. Okay. Thought it was going to be so slick by, okay, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000. Change. It's not seeing the neck. Do you need Callum?
You guys are fighting with the demo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got time. Yeah.
Sure that you weren't waiting on it.
No, I know. We're fine.
I'm just gonna stand here and talk to you.
And applause for this woman who actually is doing a hell of a good job pressing all that.
What the hell? Do you have any ideas on why my network is down? So this is Kali. It doesn't have if config. But it's not even seeing the network device. Device not managed. We'll do it without.
Okay.
I can. Nope, nope, we're good. We're gonna just get started. Whoops. All right, well, hey, DerbyCon. Hey. Hi, Internet. Hi. So, for those of you who are joining late on the stream or watching on the telly up in your rooms, there's been some pretty heavy demo fail. So there's going to be part of this lab, part of this talk that won't work as expected, but in the interest of just moving on, over 4/5 of the demos will work, so we're just going to move and get going. So we're here to talk about instant response, and one of the things that I think that we're all becoming very painfully aware as defenders is just how fast the attacks are taking place. I don't know if you folks read the talk that was, or read the paper in Wired about the NotPetya attack. Did you guys, any takers on what the fastest worldwide infection rate was for a company? 45 seconds was actually lower. 17 seconds. So we got to start moving a lot faster. So what we're going to be talking about are things that you can do using built-in components of Windows that allow you to do all kinds of interesting and fun shenanigans and really will frustrate the attackers. So what we're going to be covering is a series of PowerShell scripts and tools that Josh and I have made. And basically, each 3 of these are going to be a section that we cover, and all of them should help you make your network significantly more hostile to the bad guys without costing you a thin dime. This is all based off of components that every Windows machine has. We're using built-in API, and we're just using them in novel and interesting ways. So, hi, my name's Mick, and this was actually at my last DerbyCon talk, so see you, Hyatt, but I'm digging the new digs. And when I'm not giving talks at DerbyCon, I'm the managing partner at InfoSec Innovations, and what we do is exotic defense. So basically, if you have a network where you want every host, you want every firewall, you want every router to be a some sort of sensor, you can do that. Basically, if you're doing defense right, you're the spider sitting in the center of a web, and anything that the attackers do will be detectable, and you're going to be able to pounce, either in an automated fashion or a more focused incident response fashion. So that's what we like to do. And when I'm not doing that, I teach for SANS. I teach both 504 and 555. So 504 is the Hacker Techniques and Incident Response class, and 555 is the Tactical SIM Analytics class. Both are a ton of fun. And you can follow me on Twitter, where I'll be ranting and raving about who knows what, most recently about that little tiny grain of rice-sized chip that everybody said, oh, the sky's falling. It's not. But hint, hint, you know, in a couple days, like, if you want to buy some micro serve stuff off of on eBay, you're probably going to get a really good deal.
Hey guys, I'm Josh. I never thought I would get to present to a unicorn, so that's really awesome. Thank you for that. So I'm new to SANS. I teach Sec 530, which is the new Defensible Security Architecture class. And are any of you guys red teamers in the room? Oh, cool, quite a few. I hope you leave today just a little bit upset. And I mean that with as much love as possible. What I've been doing in my spare time is research to make your jobs as hard as possible. And you guys have done, honestly, a fantastic job with automation with PowerShell. And I think red teamers and adversaries do a great job in that post-exploitation, they're using the tools that exist on the system, and they're automating as much of attacks as they can. And you know, post-exploitation, to Mick's point, happens like that. As defenders, what we're trying to do is build our tool set to match that rate of attack and defense. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter or GitHub, JCJohnson34, a lot of the tools we'll talk about aren't really fully developed yet. We really need your help. So please, if you're interested, get in touch with us, and we'd love to keep working on these tools with you.
So one thing that I find really weird is you have a lot of red teamers giving talks on how to do security, and you hear them say defending is hard, and that, you know, the attackers have the advantage. They only need one way in. And while that's true, yeah, you know what though? Defending is a lot of fun, because I consider myself a bit above average as a pen tester, but I've never encountered a network where I didn't have some way of getting in. Attacking's easy. Defense is actually really pretty badass if you do it right. And so what we're going to be spending over the next couple minutes is some of the late-breaking testing and ideas that we've been kicking around over the past couple months to make life really miserable for pen testers and attackers alike. Now, one of the things we want to talk about is invoke network lockdown. Now, you probably, how many people were at the keynote where John Strand and Ed Scotus and Hacks for Pancakes were all together, right? When John said you need to start using a host-based firewall, there was one person who went, woo! That was me. And the reason why? They work. they work really freaking well. And so what we're going to do is show you some interesting things that you can do that use the default Windows firewall, make some very minor tweaks to them, and give you awesome telemetry in terms of what the attackers are doing, but also make it so that your systems will make life just miserable for the bad guys. So one of the things we're going to talk about are just the host-based firewalls that come with Windows. Now, when Windows Firewall was first released for Windows XP, it was a bit of a joke. And I hate to say it, but Microsoft kind of missed the ball on that one. So the Windows XP firewall was really weak and really bad. The cool thing is, though, starting with Vista, they rebuilt the Windows firewall system, and they added all kinds of cool new features that XP didn't have, such as outbound filtering, which, that's kind of nifty. But they also added some other things that almost nobody is aware of. I am shocked and a little embarrassed to admit that less than a year ago, I didn't know that Windows Firewall can actually instantiate IPsec communications from point to point. So it's pretty awesome when you start using some of these things in creative ways. So when you have your typical networks, the attackers, they know that there's insecure protocols, and machines are chatting to one another in really weak ways. Oh no, is that an ice coming our way? Okay. Well, let's get the icing over with. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Josh is a first-time presenter here, and he was like, "Oh, he's only got one. Somehow I've dodged a bullet. Not so fast, my friend." No, come here. It's so warm. It is so warm. Yeah, you have to do this. All right, salute. Oh.
I'm never presenting here again.
I want to know what that says about me that I keep coming back. Oh. All right, so typical networks. Right, there's no transition, right? You just got to jump right back in. So typical networks, the attackers know that machines are chatting with one another, and that's a problem because they can hop on the network, and now they're able to start doing all kinds of fun and interesting stuff on the network. And right away they start attacking other machines, and they start doing all these elite hacks, all kinds of cool stuff to compromise your networks, and doing all sorts of things like, pwning your machines, and all they're doing is stuff like PsExec, right? How many people here have run PsExec in your networks or at home or something like that? Okay, keep your hand up if you felt that was a little disappointingly easy, right? Yeah. So here's the deal. You want to know how to stop that? Windows Firewall. You can't hack what you can't interact with. So when you have a Windows host firewall, all of a sudden PsExec, no bueno, because it can't interact. Now, a lot of organizations say, but Mick, how do we do this? We can't put host firewalls everywhere. Yeah, you can. Windows firewalls can be pushed out via GPO. And the other cool bit is, when do you have workstations chatting to one another over 445? Workstation to workstation traffic is one of the best and easiest detects that you can do. Please, please, please write that down. Add that to your homework for when you go to your day job on Monday. Adrian, I would really appreciate it if you excised that from the presentation, because I charge $450 an hour to give that detect. So with the Windows Firewall, all of a sudden you stop that attack dead. And it's awesome. And what's even better is Windows Firewall has logging. What you can do is log potential connection attempts to ports and use that as a honeyport. One of my favorite things to do is to just periodically look through the Nmap top 1,000 ports and then use that as some honeyports. What I'll do, I will, excuse me, that's some ice coming up. Not good, I just had to share. Misery loves company. What you can do is have logging on a blocked port. I want to be very clear about this, block port. A lot of times I go to organizations and I say, hey guys, we're going to set up honeyports. And they go, hacker's going to get into that honeyport. You know what? Honeyport's not even running. Anybody who just even tries to connect to the honeyport, busted. So that's what you need to start doing, just twisting the tools that you have a little bit differently, and you're going to start seeing some pretty magical things pretty quickly. So once they're busted, bad guys' game plan is flipped on its ear, and they're so used to the same old that they're not going to know what to do. You're going to be pushing them off their normal stride, which makes your other detects easier because they're making mistakes. So my Kali Linux VM is dead. I want to double check on that. Let's see here. We're going to give this a rip, but we may be out. I had a VM fail. Yep, the NIC is dead, so we're just going to kill that. Sorry. What I'll do is I'll do a webinar where I show how that works. But basically, what you can do within Windows Firewall, let's do this a slightly different approach. If you're in your Windows control panel and you go into the Windows Firewall Defender and go under Advanced Settings right here, you can actually create IPsec rules, and there's a connection security rules. And what you can do here is actually set it up so that you have IPsec instantiated between two different hosts or even host ranges. And the beautiful part about this is it doesn't matter what the protocol is. I actually have some clients that work in the industrial control supply or ICS type stuff. Raise your hand if you're in the ICS or energy distribution. Yep. So you guys got some pretty freaky networks, stuff like Modbus. I even know some production systems that are still running Telnet. You know what's cool about that? Put IPsec tunneling around it. Nobody can see your login information. So IPsec all the things. Now, let me show you just how easy it is to enable IPsec. Okay, so we got to get into our PowerShell execution bypass mode. And now we're going to go ahead and invoke network lockdown. And now the IPsec rules are enabled. And the cool thing is now when we hop over to our host and do likewise, okay, so now I'm on my host. I have to enable the same setting. Okay, now we've got IPsec rules running on both hosts. Now, let's see if this works. we'll find out. What you can do is everything should just work as normal. Here, let me bring this up to the top. So netuse All right, so now I was able to do a net use, right? Did that look any different? No. You know why? Because Windows Firewall took care of all the crypto for us. If I had my Kali Linux box sitting up here and working, what I would do is point to the Kali Linux box, and it wouldn't be able to instantiate. Why? Because that Kali box could not do the authentication against those ports opening up. It kills man in the middle dead. Completely dead. And I don't care what kind of man in the middle they're doing, ARP cache poisoning, DNS poisoning, whatever. Kills it dead. Deploy it. Oh, and by the way, it can be pushed out via GPO. You can put user-specific firewall rules. So your users can only go to sites and parts of the network that they're allowed to go to. So this is amazing stuff. Over the next couple weeks and months, Josh and I are going to be giving you guys plenty of cool resources on how to do this super easy. Believe it or not, that command, as easy as that was to run, this invoke network lockdown, that's actually the hard way. Normally, it's going to be something that happens at boot time. So you're going to have fun. We're going to make secure easy. All right. So one thing that a lot of people, I've been doing InfoSec for quite some time, and one of the things that I find really problematic is that people say, but Mick, if we start putting in host-based firewall rules, we're going to break everything, and the line of business is going to be super angry, and we're going to be out of a job. No. Have some faith. What we're going to do for you is we've got this cool tool that Josh made that turns your NIC into learn mode, and it will log the network connections that happen. And the magic of this is that literally you don't need a SIM. You don't need NetFlow. You don't need nothing other than this script to run. And then when it's run, you now have a log of all the connections that took place for how long that system's been going. And here's the beauty of it. Anything that gets set up, you can just automatically whitelist and then over time come back and clean up the little stragglers. So you know what the magic is? I have now 4 times in my career deployed a similar concept, except we used a SIM. We were trying to be fancy. I did this. You know how many users noticed that we did that? Goose egg. Not a single complaint, not a single ticket, because if there was any traffic over, 3 months, 1 month, 6 months, whatever the time window was, we just whitelisted it and allowed it to go on, and then every week we went back and culled that list. Now here's the magic of this. We also have a helper script that will cull these firewall logs and help set up the IPsec tunnels for you. So now, giddy up. A lot of people complain, Mick, these logs are long. Yeah, they are. You know what? You're not reading them. The scripts are. Let them do all the work. So, trying to send me an exploit? Nope. It's just that simple, folks. You can't hack what you can't interact with. Now, man in the middle is a really big problem in our industry that we got to talk about. And there are tons of insecure protocols. And again, unfortunately, the Kali box died, but I would be able to show you how it looks when you set up a relay. Setting up a relay literally is a one-liner, and you can just start listening in on the traffic. So man in the middle, simple, easy, just say no to it. Do IPsec tunneling, and the bad guys can't do anything about it. So remember, learn mode, IPsec tunneling for you, and the work's already done. My goal and Josh's goal is by this time next year, there's going to be way more IPsec networking going on in Windows environments. The cool thing about it is, as I just showed you with that netuse command, completely transparent to the user. You know who it's not transparent to? The attackers. Because all they see is random gibberish, if that. A lot of times, they're not even going to be able to instantiate the man in the middle. So this is awesome win. Again, you can't get man in the middle attacked if attackers can't send packets. So with that, I want to kick it over to Josh, and he's going to talk about pause process.
Was anyone here during Mick's talk on pause process last year? Cool. So that inspired me to start using this tool. So what pause process is, Mick wrote this tool, and what it does is it allows you to attach a built-in Windows debugger to a running process. And when you do that, the process execution is just completely halted. And the debugger has full control. If it's a shell that an attacker has, it's completely useless to them at that point. They can't interact with it. They can't do anything until we unpause that process. So when I first saw pause process, it inspired me to write a tool. And it was kind of a weird use case. Mick was kind of surprised by this. But what we did was we wrote a tool, and it watched process invocation. And whenever new processes were created, if the process was Internet Explorer, it went and looked at what the parent process was. And if the parent process was Outlook.exe, that means that we know that the user has clicked a link in an email, Outlook has spawned a child process of Internet Explorer. So what I did was I wrote this tool, and it scraped out the command line of the Internet Explorer process invocation. And what that allowed us to do was pop up a message to the user. So we'd pause Internet Explorer, we'd pop a message to the user and say, hey, this is the URL that you're actually going to. Did you mean to go here? And if it's a phishing email, the user's like, blah, blah, blah.ru. No, I thought I was going to Amazon. And sure enough, we saw quite a bit of impact here with users just not getting phished anymore, because now they're able to get just a second chance. And again, we put some other logic in there so that we would call a Google Safe Browsing API at the same time, check to see if the site's malicious, block it completely if it is. But we just gave the user another chance. And that conversation with Mick and I spawned some more conversation, and we're coming out with this idea it's almost like EDR, but it gives us the ability to natively, just using PowerShell, pause processes on demand. So if you think about it, when you look at processes on a Windows system, you'll see things like this. And you'll see Notepad, and is that normal? Maybe. Well, what if Notepad is running a system? What if Notepad is beaconing out to the internet every 5 seconds? Those are completely abnormal situations. We want to be able to take action on that immediately. And I think pause process is the perfect way to do that. So again, if you see Notepad running as system, it could be that an attacker has a Meterpreter shell, spawned a Notepad as system, and then migrated into that process so they don't lose their shell. We went through a bunch of different scenarios, and we kind of outlined, well, here's everything we can do with PowerShell just running on the system, watching process invocation, watching network events, watching Sysmon logs. Does anyone run Sysmon? Awesome, I see a ton of hands. That's excellent. So what we're doing here is we're pulling all of those different data points, and we're making decisions on if we want to pause processes or not. So let me show you an example of Honey document access. So one thing we didn't mention is that honeyport, the whole honeyport process, we actually wrote a script for this, and the honeyport script will spin up a bunch of different deception techniques on every host. So you blow this script out to all your machines, it'll spin up honeyports on each one, and it'll also do things like this. It'll create a honey directory.